Hey everybody, welcome back to ancient Rome. So let's talk about those Romans. Now, Rome was getting bigger and bigger, and Roman consuls and generals won more and more battles and wars, and these leaders got to keep farmland. Every time they won a battle, every time they won a war, they would be awarded farmland as part of their victory. And they also got slaves. And so these Roman generals and aristocrats and consuls, they're getting richer and richer, and they're taking more and more land and more slaves, which means that let's say you're an average peasant farmer. You have your farmland, maybe like 6 acres, 7 acres of farmland, and you have your family to work the farm. It costs a lot for you to make a very little amount of food. You're working hard all the time. This Roman general has 100,000 acres of land, and he's got 10,000 slaves working that land. Who is going to be able to sell food in the marketplace for smaller amounts of money? Who's going to sell cheaper food? You and your family who have to work super hard to make it, or this Roman general who makes so much he can flood the market? Well, peasant farmers were finding it harder and harder to exist because the Roman generals and the Roman consuls were getting richer and richer and could sell their food for less because each amount of like crop that they could get cost less for them to make than it did for you to make. So they can sell for less. Everybody's going to buy from the big farmers, from the big consuls and aristocrats, and the small farmers are going to go out of business. So what can you do? If you're the small farmer, you could just keep trying and not make any money and eventually go bankrupt and eventually just die. Not that eventually either, relatively quickly, unfortunately. Or you could sell off your farmland and take that money and move to the city and hopefully find a new life in the city. And that's what a lot of the farmers did. But think, who was willing to buy your farmland? Well, those rich aristocrats, right? They were the ones driving you out of business in the first place. So these rich aristocrats are buying up more and more land, and the commoners are leaving and going to the city, which means that the cities are going to be overcrowded. Apartments in the city that were intended for 3 or 4 people are going to have 12, 15, 20 people living in them. And there's going to be a lot of unemployed people in the city. There's going to be a lot of angry people in the city. You're going to run out of money if you move to the city and you can't find a job. And so you've got a lot of poor people who are demanding help. That's what happened with ancient Rome in its beginning. You have the aristocrats, and you have the people already living in cities who are plebeians, and then you have plebeians from the countryside constantly flooding into the cities as it gets harder and harder for them to run their own family farms. And these people are going to be angry. These plebeians in the cities are going to be very angry. They're going to protest. They're going to be violent in the streets. And not that America would know anything about protesting and violence in the streets, but they're going to want change. Big change. Fast. These poor people looked up to heroes in the government who could help them. And there were 2 brothers who decided to rise up. Even though they were patricians, they decided to help the plebeian class. Their names were Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. So Gracchus is their family name, the Gracchus Brothers. These brothers they didn't want to be in the Senate. They wanted to be representatives of the poor people. And so they became tribunes. Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus were tribunes for the poor. They vetoed things that the Senate put up. They gave brilliant speeches against the rich patricians. Eventually, the Senate hated them so much that They were both assassinated. They were murdered by the Senate, by the rich. And after their assassinations, the poor rose up and caused a civil war in ancient Rome. There was about 60 years of unrest, 60 years of violent disruption in the Roman Republic. The generals who were elected consul fought against each other. Ones who had been consul before decided not to wait and instead just tried to become consul again by taking their loyal soldiers and fighting against consuls at the time. It was a nasty period of civil war. Eventually, 3 leaders joined forces. Not two consuls, but 3 guys decided to join forces and share the power and fight off all comers, everybody who was going to try to take it away. We call a 3-person leadership group a triumvirate. 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 And the first triumvirate of leaders in Roman history was Pompey and Crassus and Julius Caesar. Pompey was a very popular, very skilled politician. Crassus was filthy rich. One of the coolest, most interesting things about Crassus is that one of the ways he made his money was he started the very first fire brigade, fire department in Rome. And it wasn't public, though. You had to pay. You had to pay a weekly fee to be covered by the fire department. And the thing was, Crassus would have his gangsters go to your shop or to your house, and they'd say, "Hey, you got a nice house here. Be a shame if it caught on fire. We can help you avoid that. Pay us." And so you'd pay your money. And then if a fire broke out, they'd come and put it out. Guess what happened if you didn't pay? They came around and they started a fire. Okay? So if you don't pay the money, you get a fire for free. And then when Crassus shows up right away, miraculously right away, to put out your fire, it costs a lot more than it would have if you already bought the fire insurance. And for as long as you say no, go away, the cost just keeps going up. So it's basically what we would call extortion, in order to make sure your shop doesn't catch on fire mysteriously. So that's Crassus. That's one of the ways that he makes his millions and millions. Crassus is said to be one of the richest people in human history. And that was just one of his schemes. He had a lot, but that was one of Crassus's schemes. And then there's this third guy, Julius Caesar. Interesting thing about Julius Caesar, his family were the Julians. Caesar was his personal name. Julian is the family name. And the Julians claimed that they were actually half god, because Julius Caesar and his ancestors supposedly came from the goddess of love, Venus, who the Greeks used to call Aphrodite. And so there's this really famous statue of Julius Caesar's nephew, Augustus. His original name was Octavian, but we'll get into that later. And right by Augustus, at his ankles, is a tiny little Cupid. And Cupid was the child of Venus. And so that's actually Augustus's ancestor. That cute little Cupid baby is actually the ancestor of Augustus Caesar, if you believe in that. Nobody really believes in Roman gods anymore, or nobody that I know. But that was a message to the people of Rome that we are descended from the gods themselves. So be good to us, be loyal to us. Okay. Now, in order to get into the triumvirate and for Pompey to trust this young, ambitious, strong general, Julius Caesar, Caesar had to offer up his sister as a wife to Pompey. And Pompey was 32 years older than this girl at the time. So, yikers, right? A little nasty there. But anyway, Julius Caesar becomes family to Pompey by having his sister marry Pompey. Now, Julius Caesar became a little too popular. He was helping out the poor people a little bit too much for Crassus's taste, and even Pompey was starting to get a little nervous about Julius Caesar. So they decided to send him off to conquer an area that nobody could ever conquer. It was going to be a total failure. Don't worry, this is going to be awesome. Julius Caesar will just die with his army when we send them there, and he'll get out of our hair. The place that they sent him to was modern-day northern France. Back then it was called Gaul, and the Gauls were the people who lived there. So they sent Julius Caesar to Gaul thinking it would kill him, and they'd be rid of a very popular, dangerous person in their triumvirate. But the problem for them was that not only did he make it out alive, he became a hero, almost a superhero in Roman people's eyes, because not only did he invade Gaul, but he conquered it. Within a short period of time, he had built bridges over all the rivers so that Roman armies could go back into Gaul in the future. He'd beaten the Gaul leaders. He had conquered the territory. And not only did he conquer it, he wrote a book describing how awesome it was to do it, and how cool he was, and how smart it was. Every move he made was super smart. And he had it published in Rome. So he'd gone from being the guy who'd die out there to being the amazing military hero conqueror who could do anything. So Crassus and Pompey were like, this is worse than before. We need to figure out how to get rid of Julius Caesar. So they sent him a message. Come back to Rome. We need to have a talk. Now, Julius Caesar knew what was happening. He knew that they'd sent him out there to die. He knew that conquering Gaul was the only way to come out of it alive, and he knew that they were giving him a death sentence when they told him to come home. So he said to his army, guys, we've done amazing things. We've been absolutely incredible. But now the Roman government is calling us traitors, and they're saying we're going to die. Do you want them to kill me? Do you want to lose everything we've gained? If the answer's no, follow me back to Rome. And so instead of leaving his army in Gaul, he marched them all home. Now, there's a river like 10 miles outside of the city of Rome that is called the Rubicon River. And you're supposed to leave your army there. If you're a general, you can't come closer to the city of Rome than the Rubicon River with your army. Because if you do, then they assume that you're a traitor and you're going to try to conquer the city with your army. The city of Rome already has a general who's in charge of it who protects the city. They don't need your army coming into that territory. There's already a garrison to take care of Rome. So, if you're a general, you leave your army at the Rubicon River and come alone. Well, Julius Caesar got his men to the Rubicon and then said, men, this is it. Once we go across this river, if you choose to stay with me, we will be thought of as traitors. You could be executed for following me closer than the Rubicon River. But if you leave me here, I will be executed and everything we fought for is gone. Are you willing to take a chance? Are you willing to conquer the city of Rome itself so that we can give poor people the help that they need, so that we can overthrow Pompey and Crassus, so that we can create an ideal Rome? And his soldiers lifted him up and held him on their shoulders and marched him all the way into Rome. Now, Crassus was already away from Rome, fighting a war on the other side of the empire, I think against the Parthians. So he was closer to the Middle East, and he died in battle against the Parthians anyway. Now, Pompey was running the city of Rome, and when he saw Julius Caesar coming, he knew he could do two things. He could stay and fight, or he could run away. He chickened out. He said, if I run away now with my supporters, I can come back later and take everything from Julius Caesar. Plus, I can hope that Caesar screws something up on the way. So Pompey took his supporters and left. They fled. They went to Egypt. Julius Caesar was able to conquer the city. No one was defending the city because Pompey had taken all his supporters. So Julius Caesar is voted dictator of the city of Rome. He gets to be in charge. That's in the year 49. Then he was voted in the year 48 dictator for 10 whole years. And then in the year 46, only 2 years later, he was made dictator for life, or basically made king. Okay? Now, Pompey had run away to Egypt. He had gone there because he thought that one of Alexander the Great's generals, Ptolemy, who had taken control, he thought that Ptolemy's grandchildren or great-grandchildren would help him. So the ruler of Egypt at that time, when he got there, was a kid, like a 13-year-old boy named Ptolemy, the great-grandson of Alexander the Great's general. So this kid Ptolemy thinks, Pompey has come and wants my help and wants my support, but what if Julius Caesar is going to be a stronger leader than Pompey? What if Julius Caesar is really the next greatest leader of the world? What should I do to Pompey? So when Julius Caesar shows up in Egypt, he actually wants to invite Pompey back into the government. He wants to make himself, Julius Caesar, look like a legit ruler who can bring different groups together to create a better Rome. So he goes to Egypt hoping that he can talk Pompey into rejoining a coalition with him. What he finds is Ptolemy's servants produce a silver plate with a lid, and they take the lid off the plate, and there is Pompey's severed head. Ptolemy decided it was going to be safer to side with Caesar and kill Pompey. And Caesar was not happy. He was pretty angry at the fact that the one guy he wanted to join forces with to make his government look more legit was dead. But, so this Roman dictator, Julius Caesar, was shocked and horrified to see Pompey, the guy he hoped would be a future ally, and his own brother-in-law, remember, decapitated. So he went to a tent and sat there skulking and depressed. And then a servant came to the tent and said, your incredible dictatorship, there's a gift for you. Someone has sent you a rug. So these servants bring in a tall, long rug that's all rolled up, and they unroll the rug, and there's a person in the middle of it. Ptolemy's sister, an older sister, like a 17-year-old girl, named Cleopatra. You've heard of her. Cleopatra gets unrolled out of this rug and says to Julius Caesar, my brother is a jerk. My brother is going to destroy Egypt. I want you to help me overthrow him. Help me get rid of my brother Ptolemy, and I'll be your wife. You're like 30, 35. I'm 17. We'll be a great couple. We'll have kids, and our kids can rule a united kingdom of Rome and the entire Roman Empire and Egypt together. If you're my husband, you'll become the Pharaoh of Egypt. You'll be king, and I'll be queen. All we have to do is get rid of my brother. Let's do it. So Julius Caesar, well, there's a snag. He's already married back in Rome. He's got a wife, but it's not that big a snag. He's cool with a 17-year-old girl. And so Julius Caesar marries Cleopatra in Egypt, goes home to Rome, divorces his wife publicly, and has a giant victory parade with his new Egyptian wife. She does get pregnant. She does have a kid. It's born not the normal way, but they have to cut it out. And this is where we get the term C-section or a cesarean, Caesar, Julius Caesar, Caesar's kid, had to be born by being cut out. It wasn't the first time in history that it happened, but it gives us the name for it. C-section, Caesarean section, birth. Anyway, when he got back to Rome, Caesar pushed a gigantic number of laws through that helped take land and money away from the super rich and give it to the poor. He wanted to be a popular ruler with poor people. He wanted to get the gap between the rich and the poor under control. He gave extra land and money to retired soldiers who had fought in the army on either side, for him or against him. And he was taking money and land away from patricians in order to do it. These actions made him unpopular in the one place where the patricians controlled everything, the Roman Senate. Yep. He went to the Senate in March of the year 44 BC to give a speech. It was the Ides of March. And a group of senators had basically already decided that he had to die. And they got critical mass as a group. They got the energy that they needed to do it by convincing one of Julius Caesar's best friends, Brutus. Remember, it was a Brutus in the last section who had driven out Tarquin, the last Etruscan king, and who had started the Republic as a form of government. And now, this Brutus, his great-great-great-grandson, was like, my family's always hated kings. My family has never been okay with anybody being a king. And even if it's my best friend, I'm not okay with Rome having a king. We need to stop him. So they assassinated Julius Caesar. They stabbed him to death right on the floor of the Senate after his speech. Supporters of Julius Caesar now lined up in two different armies to hate on the Senate. One of the leaders of this group was Octavian, Julius Caesar's nephew, and he adopted him as his heir. So everything that Julius Caesar owned went to Octavian as his heir, even though he was only a nephew. The other group that hated on the Senate was led by Julius Caesar's best military buddy, his second in command, a guy named Mark Antony. So these forces, Octavian's supporters and Mark Antony's supporters, buddied up and hunted down the senators who had assassinated Julius Caesar. They chased them with an army. Eventually, in the year 42, so this war has been going on for a couple of years, trying to hunt down the senators. Brutus lost the battle. The Roman senators lost the battle, and Brutus committed suicide rather than allow himself to be captured by Octavian and by Mark Antony. At this point, Mark Antony and Octavian decided that they would try to rule Rome together. But they wanted one other person involved to be like a blending mix for them, somebody in the middle between them. And they chose a guy named Lepidus. He had been a friend of Julius Caesar's. So these three guys, Lepidus, Mark Antony, and Octavian, all joined forces as a government, a triumvirate. This is the second triumvirate. The first one was Pompey and Crassus and Julius Caesar. The second triumvirate after this civil war between the senators and Mark Antony and Octavian was Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Mark Antony decided that he was going to become Cleopatra's new husband, and he moved to Egypt. He didn't stay in Rome. He was an alcoholic and a partier and a hard-living soldier, and so he didn't fit in with Octavian. Octavian was a nerd. Octavian was a serious student of political science and human psychology and very serious, whereas Mark Antony was a partier. So Mark Antony decided to move to Egypt with Cleopatra, become her new husband, and Octavian decided that Lepidus really wasn't up to running the government with him, so he fired Lepidus and took charge of the city of Rome himself. Octavian decided that letting Mark Antony remain in Egypt as a crazy partier Egyptian pharaoh was not a great idea. And so he started to turn the Roman people against Mark Antony, to make them think Mark Antony had stopped being a Roman at all, that he had gone native as an Egyptian, that he was irresponsible and reckless and didn't deserve to be in charge of anything. So he led an army and a navy to attack Mark Antony and his wife Cleopatra. He beat them in the Battle of the Nile in the year 31, and then in the year 30, remember we're counting backwards to 0 since we're in BC. In the year 30, he beat them on land. After this defeat, Mark Antony and Cleopatra both decided to commit suicide rather than be captured by Octavian. Octavian is now the sole ruler of everything, and he got to pick a new name for himself. He chose the name Augustus. If something is august, then it means it's holy. It should be worshipped. It should be revered, appreciated, respected. Okay, so August, the month of August, certainly because it's the last one before we go back to school, is something that you worship every year, right? You really appreciate the month of August. If you think about it, though, it's kind of crazy. We named the capital city in Maine Augusta, a place that should be worshipped and respected. But does anybody respect Maine state government? Like, really? So it's kind of ironic that we get Augusta out of the word August. But Augustus as a Roman emperor, someone who was worshipped, respected, and revered. He became the supreme commander of the Roman army and the government. He was in charge from 27 BC all the way to 0. So that's 27 years. And then he died in 14 AD. So 27 plus 14. And that means he was in charge for 41 years. Emperor for 41 years. His time in charge was a huge success for the city of Rome. He brought peace and stability to the city after a long period of chaos and disruption and war. For 200 years, starting with Augustus, for 200 years, Rome never got an award that they didn't want and that they didn't win. For 200 years, this period of stability was called the Pax Romana. Pax, P-A-X, means a time of peace, an era of dominance. And Romana, Roman Empire. So this is the era of peace because the Roman Empire dominates everything. In this time, Rome grew to be 3 million square miles big, all the way from basically where civilization started in Asia, Western civilization at least, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, all the way to Spain and North Africa, all the way from northern England down to southern Egypt. Just a giant, massive empire. It included 70 million people, which for the ancient world is a lot. Augustus started all of this by fixing the government, fixing the infrastructure of the Roman Empire, meaning he repaired roads, he made the oceans safer to travel on by getting rid of pirates, he did all kinds of canals and bridges, all kinds of things. He had great new public temples and government buildings set up that glorified the power of the Roman Empire. He also focused on getting Romans to stop being naughty, and especially their private husband and wife style behavior with people who weren't their husbands and wives. The Romans had sex parties, and where you didn't have to be with your husband or your wife. And it meant that people were having babies that weren't their husband's babies, It meant that men were having affairs with other people's wives. It meant that there were a lot of bad issues going on. Fights and rivalries, jealousy, murder. And Augustus wanted none of this. He wanted stability and peace. And so Augustus demanded that everyone stop having these parties, that everyone be loyal to their husband or loyal to their wife only, that everybody calm down and respect the family. The funny part is that Augustus's daughter was like one of the worst people who went out and partied and cheated on her husband all the time and just wasn't really living up to any of this. And he warned her. He said, "You're not above the law, and if I have to punish you in order to make you an example for everybody else, I'm going to punish you." She didn't listen. So Augustus had her arrested for breaking the laws and sent her to live on an island that was uninhabited except for her and the guards who were there to make sure that she was kept prisoner there for the rest of her life. She died there. He sent her into exile on a deserted island for life because she refused to follow the rules. And he wanted to make an example of her. If she wasn't going to respect the family values, she had to go. The Romans traded all over the Roman Empire. They made tons and tons of money. They were fantastically rich. They had a great system of roads, lots of ocean commerce as well, all over the Mediterranean Sea and up the coast to England. Romans used slavery more than most civilizations. It's thought that maybe 1/3 of all the people inside the Roman Empire were slaves. 1/3 of the population. Masters could punish their slaves however they wanted. Some slaves were gladiators, and these gladiators would fight for their survival. They would entertain the common people, so the common people wouldn't be focused on how miserable their lives were a lot of the time. Because ancient Rome was fantastically rich, but that doesn't mean the average person was rich at all. They weren't. The people at the top were rich. And so in order to make sure that poor people were entertained and that they didn't want to kill the rich, they were given entertainment like gladiator battles. These gladiators would fight other gladiators. They'd fight wild animals from exotic parts of the empire that average Roman people had never seen. They would be given free food. The crowds at these gladiator contests would be given free food so that they felt taken care of and loved by the emperor while they were watching people get slaughtered. If a gladiator lost and wasn't killed in combat, then the crowd and the emperor would get to vote on whether to keep them alive if they fought well enough to be allowed to live. And all this was the way that the patricians, the super rich patricians, could keep the plebeians from thinking too hard about how miserable their lives were, their everyday lives. The biggest of these stadiums was called the Colosseum. Actually, its real name was the Flavian Amphitheater. It's called the Colosseum because there was a statue next to it called the Colossus. And so this is the stadium next to the Colossus, the Colosseum. You make a Roman amphitheater by taking two Greek theaters. Remember, a Greek theater is a half circle, usually built into the side of a hill, so that the bleachers that you sit on are carved out of the marble of the hill. You take two of those and put them together, and you create a Roman amphitheater, a stadium, or the Colosseum as a biggest example. Interesting fact about the Colosseum itself is that it was built over the ruins of a giant swimming pool that had been the property of just the Roman emperor. But a future Roman emperor was like, the average people don't want to see us living quite this rich. And so he built a stadium on top of it. The plumbing, though, for the swimming pool is still there, even today. And if you wanted, you could flood the Colosseum, the ground floor of the Colosseum, the under the stage part of the Colosseum. And the Romans would frequently have naval battles there. They would actually bring in battleships to the Colosseum and rebuild them there, and then flood it, and they'd have naval battles in the middle of the Colosseum stage for all the people sitting in the stands. Yeah, kind of cool. And another interesting thing about Roman amphitheaters is that they have so many entrances and exits, and it's all arranged so incredibly well that you can get thousands of people in and out of a Roman amphitheater in minutes. Like, so well organized, so many entrances and exits that it's very direct to get in and out. The average attendance at the Roman amphitheater, the Flavian amphitheater, named for Flavius, the emperor who had it built, we call it the Colosseum, was 65,000. 65,000 people there. That's huge. One of the greatest gladiators, a guy named Spartacus, led a giant rebellion against Rome that lasted for 2 whole years. He tried to liberate all the slaves in Rome and help them get free rather than stay in Italy. He failed, but he became a big heroic figure in history for trying to liberate the slaves of Rome. There's several movies about Spartacus. The best one was made right around 1960 with Kirk Douglas. And there's recent TV dramas about Spartacus, like the one that was on HBO or Cinemax, I think. The more modern ones are violent with lots of CGI blood and fights and stuff. Now, religion in Rome. Religion was very important to the Romans. They believed in lots of gods, just like the Greeks. As a matter of fact, most of the Roman gods came originally from the Greeks. Like the Greek god of war, Ares, becomes Mars for the Romans. The goddess Hera for the Greeks becomes Juno for the Romans. Zeus becomes Jupiter. Kronos becomes Saturn. And on and on. Hades, the god of the underworld, becomes Pluto. Poseidon, the god of the ocean, becomes Neptune. So Aphrodite, the goddess of love, becomes Venus, right? And there's lots of comparisons between, and a lot of them are planets. Great way to remember it is just remembering the planets. Loyalty to the Roman Empire meant worshiping their gods. And if you refused their gods, then you were punished, just like the Christians and the Jews. More next time.